Hello, I'm Evgenia, your instructor for this masterclass. I'm a professional watercolorist, Skillshare teacher, and the founder of Magical Watercolor. Join my community on Skillshare, where I teach watercolor and coffee art. Learn, share, and grow alongside fellow artists from around the world. More info and links on my website at belivar.be. I've been a professional artist for many years, focusing exclusively on watercolors. I've always been captivated by the magic of this medium. I started to paint when I was a child, but as I grew, I had no idea how to improve or how to create effects that I wanted. I didn't know any of the techniques or how to use them. Now I've taken part in exhibitions and been fortunate enough to win rewards from such highly regarded organizations as International Watercolor Society, Helvet Art, Light Space Time, Art Show International, and Royal Talents. Watercolor can be challenging to manage for those who start to use this medium, which is why it's my intention to help you to enjoy watercolors and to learn it in an easy and fun way. In the step-by-step lessons, you can see the hand and brush movements clearly from different points of view. We will explore versatile and fundamental watercolor techniques that you can use in all your paintings and sketches. Also, we will discuss the materials that will enhance your watercolor experience and will help you to enjoy the process greatly. You can choose from my different classes available for learning varied watercolor skills. The approach of my classes is to start with an easy wash. As we proceed with the painting step by step, we will add more details, completing the artwork. If you have any struggles or difficulties along the way, you can start a discussion and I will read and respond to all your questions. Remember to hit the follow button next to the class title, just below the video. By doing so, you'll stay updated and be among the first to receive updates on my upcoming classes and exclusive giveaways. Also, you can see my latest free watercolor tips and tutorials by following me on Instagram and YouTube. Welcome, and let's get started. Today we'll create an inspiring visual of a steaming hot cup, using just one color. We'll begin by shaping the cup, giving it a rounded and realistic form. Next, we'll move to the upper part of the painting, focusing on creating soft, blurred steam that blends seamlessly into the background. After completing the steam and the background, we'll paint the table beneath the cup. Once everything is in place, we'll ensure the paper is completely dry before adding the finishing touches for the extra detail and depth. Make sure you have plenty of paper tissues nearby. You'll need them, and it's always better to have extra. Let's go over the materials we'll need for this class. You'll need a variety of brushes, including round brushes for general painting, fine tip round brushes for detailed work, flat brushes for broad strokes, and fine brushes for precision. A broad flat brush is particularly useful for wetting the paper and spreading color over large areas. For this class, I'll be using one color, Mahogany Brown, a granulating watercolor by Schmincke. I'll be painting on arches cold-pressed paper, size 21 by 29.5 centimeters. Before we start painting, make sure to soften the pencil lines with a kneaded eraser. This will make it easier to erase them after the painting is complete. We will start with the cup on dry paper, using an all-around round brush. Since we are using just one color, we'll need different tones of it. Add water and color to your palette to prepare these tones. The darkest one will come directly from the watercolor pen or tube, undiluted. Begin by taking a very diluted tone to start coloring the cup, keeping in mind that the light falls from the left. Paint the cup and the refraction of the table visible within it using this light tone. Add a slightly darker tone to the cup, touching the previous stains to create soft transitions. Keep the sunny area of the table that refracts into the cup lighter, adding darker tones to the bottom. Add darker tones to the bottom of the cup and other shadowed areas to build depth. If the color bleeds into unwanted areas, dry your brush and gently lift the excess paint. Use soft strokes to tickle the edges of the stain, softening them. Add undiluted color to shape the roundness of the cup and accentuate the refraction by painting around it. The stains will blend with the wet areas, creating smooth transitions. Add a light tone to the cup between the steam and a darker tone to represent the hot beverage. Gradually introduce darker stains to add more depth. Now carefully shape the cup's handle, keeping the lightest area unpainted to show where the light hits. The thicker part of the handle will be in shadow, so use darker tone there. Use undiluted paint to add contrast and make the edges more defined. Once everything is complete, thoroughly dry the painting before moving on to the next steps. Take a separate jar of fresh water to use for wetting the paper. Flip your paper over and begin moistening the back with a broad flat brush or a sponge, ensuring the paper is thoroughly saturated. Turn the paper back to the front and carefully wet the surface around the cup, gently flattening it as you go. Notice how the paper glistens. It hasn't yet been absorbed by the paper. Test a corner of the sheet to check if it's fully moistened. The paper should feel pliable and flexible, signaling it's ready for painting. Speed up the process by lightly dabbing the surface with a paper tissue to absorb any excess moisture. Now the paper looks damp, with no puddles, making it perfect for wet-on-wet painting, a wonderful technique that adds magic to watercolors. Take a large round brush and load it with undiluted color directly from the watercolor tube or a pan. Spread the pigment playfully on the damp paper, letting the watercolor flow and blend naturally. Work around the stem's outline and introduce soft lines to represent light falling from the left. Diffuse the strokes into the paper to create uneven, textured effects. Accentuate the cup by painting carefully around it. As the pigment lightens while being absorbed, add more saturated color directly from the pan to enhance the depth on the damp paper. Use playful strokes to blend and diffuse the colors further. Add more pigment to the table and paint fine lines to mimic wood texture. Switch to a fine brush to paint between the gaps in the stem, leaving the light areas unpainted. Use a crumpled tissue to dab the stem surface, making it drier and adding subtle texture. Then take a more saturated color to define the gaps in the stem further, darkening the background to enhance contrast. Create texture by gently tapping a brush loaded with pigment against another brush to splatter droplets onto the damp paper, adding artistic unevenness. Continue darkening the background by first painting around the stem. Then use a larger brush to spread saturated color over broader areas for contrast. Repeat the process on the left side and darken the table surface as well. Carefully accentuate the cup's edge with the tip of your brush. Draw a fine line on the table to define its surface. Blend and stretch color stains for a smoother transition. Add even more pigment to the gaps to refine the stem's shape. Use a fine rigger brush with long bristles and draw wood-like texture lines on the table, loading the brush with color straight from the pan. For a final touch, splatter color onto the paper once more, adding artistic elements to the composition. In this step, we will create the table in the foreground. The paper is still slightly damp, so we'll dry it further by dabbing a paper tissue to absorb any remaining surface moisture. Next, we'll use the dry brush technique to craft a rugged wooden table edge. Load your brush heavily with pigment, adding just a tiny drop of water to pick up the color, no more. Hold your brush horizontally, almost parallel to the surface, and start drawing a line. You'll notice the line is slightly broken due to the textured cold-pressed paper. Paint more fully a bit lower and use a very light tone to accentuate the bright reflections on the table surface. Add some lines to mimic wood texture and splatter a few drops for an organic look. If any drops are unwanted, simply lift them with a clean, damp brush. Enhance the shadowy areas on the table with more lines. Now let's paint the shadow. Load your brush with undiluted color and carefully outline the shadow, shaping the cup's edge as you go. Switch to a larger brush to fill in the shadow, adding more pigment as needed for contrast. Repeat this process for the second part of the shadow, applying the color with playful strokes and blending the stains. To darken the foreground, apply saturated color unevenly and add more pigment along the way. Use a broad flat brush, dampened slightly, to go over the previous strokes in the foreground. This moisture will mingle the colors unevenly for a natural effect. You can shape the stains further by adding pigment to the wet surface and blending them with a flat brush. If any color bleeds in an undesired way, lift it with a clean, damp brush by gently dabbing or tickling the area. For the part of the table visible through the cup's handle, use a fine brush to match the table stone. Add more pigment around the cup to enhance depth, and use a few strokes to refine the wood texture. Since the table wash has lightened, now it is great time to apply more pigment for added contrast. Use short, quick, uneven strokes to spread the color, and blend them with a broad brush. Switch to a round or filbert brush to create light spots in the background, by tapping or swirling the bristles. Darken the gaps in the stem to give it more dimension. To intensify the background, spread more color while the paper is still damp, allowing the strokes to diffuse and create a soft blurry effect. Add extra pigment to the shadow and foreground for richer contrast. The number of layers required depends on the medium you are using, For example, painting with coffee may only require one layer, making it ideal for beginners practicing watercolor techniques. To make the steam appear more compact, darken parts of it. This is where moistening the paper on both sides proves useful, as it keeps the surface damp longer, allowing more time for adjustments. Be mindful that in hot weather, the paper will dry faster. Use quick strokes to shape the steam and gently rub stains with a damp filbert brush to soften any harsh lines. Refine the steam's edge with a fine brush and add areas of saturated color to highlight semi-transparent swirls. For a final artistic touch, splatter clean water drops in the shadowy area using a wedge brush tapped against another brush. Follow this by splattering pigment drops, which will remain outlined as the paper dries. Finally, dry your paper thoroughly with a hairdryer, or let it dry naturally. Start by gently raising the pencil lines to clean up the surface without disturbing the paint. In this step, we'll focus on adding tiny details and making adjustments to enhance depth and definition in your artwork. Begin by adding more color to the cup's edge for a polished look. Deepen the shadows on the handle and add additional pigment to the left side of the cup to emphasize light and shadow contrast. Darken the hot beverage by applying richer tones in the gaps of the steam for more visual depth. On the table, strengthen the perspective by painting more saturated lines into the wood texture. For the steam, use a clean wedge brush to lift pigment and create soft streaks, mimicking the appearance of vapor. For the steam, use a clean wedge brush to lift pigment and create soft streaks, mimicking the appearance of vapor. After lifting the pigment, dab the area with a dry tissue to stop the moisture from spreading further. Continue this process, alternating between lifting and darkening until you are satisfied with the result. Adjust the cup's edge by lifting a little pigment to refine its shape. Lifting pigment from the edge of a sunny area can create a subtle sparkling effect, adding a touch of realism and brightness to your painting. Congratulations on completing the sunny and inspiring artwork. If you enjoyed this process, join me on Skillshare to explore more of my watercolor and coffee painting classes. Choose from 11 different classes and learn alongside over 1,500 students. Sign up for a 30-day free trial using the link on belivar.be and let's create together. Also, you can see my latest free watercolor tips and tutorials by following me on Instagram and YouTube.